T72-0000. The countdown stamped itself across every screen in the Luna Defense Complex, a stark white timer against a field of blue-black stars. Admiral Sarah Caldwell hated the font. It was clean, beautiful, indifferent. It looked like the future telling Earth to hurry up. "Put them through," she said. The alien emissary bloomed on the main display, a filamented being the color of quicksilver, eyes like polished hematite. "Humans," it sang, consonants chiming like glass. "I speak for the Varen Concord and the Council of Older Nations. You have expanded too far, too fast. You seed worlds without leave. You cut the long routes of order. Within 72 hours, you will withdraw to Sol. Abandon your colonies, research stations, and lines of trade. This is not a negotiation. This is a correction." General Isaiah Brooks folded his broad hands behind his back. "How many ships?" "Initial tally confirms almost 3,000 at the rim," answered Dr. Naomi Tran, Xenopolitics. "Vector analysis shows movement along the Perseus arm. They expect compliance, not a fight." Caldwell watched the emissary's fingers twitch, watched it avoid eye line even through the buffer of light years. Naomi leaned closer. "Fear," she whispered. "They're terrified we learned too quickly." The emissary's tone darkened. "Choose survival over pride." The channel went dead. Air returned to the room in one collective breath, as if everyone had forgotten to inhale. Caldwell kept looking at the empty screen and saw in the reflection the people who trusted her to choose wisely, young watch officers with coffee-sour breath, a comms chief still wearing a cadet ring, the old Marine with 4 campaigns behind his eyes. Good people. A nation's promise packed into a single room. "We can't fight 3,000 ships," Brooks said. "We're not fighting 3,000 ships," Caldwell replied. "We're fighting a story about who we are." At 13, she had won a county essay contest on Federalist No. 51. The thesis was childish and correct. Power should check power so people could live like neighbors instead of subjects. She thought of that as she keyed a channel whose name did not appear on any manifest. Then another. At the bottom of the stack was a black key with a single word, Aegis. Naomi hesitated. "Ma'am, that protocol was mothballed." "Not mothballed," Caldwell said. "Hidden on purpose, so we'd only open it if we meant it." The console asked for her oath. She recited it like the pledge she'd learned in a Midwestern gymnasium, words about liberty and justice that sounded simple until you had to pay for them. Her voice didn't tremble. "Code phrase?" the console asked. Caldwell thought of the first ship that left Earth orbit, of a transistor radio in her grandfather's garage, of a flag sewn by people who knew you could love a nation and argue with it every day of your life. She typed, "The Guardians come home." Across Mars's basalt deserts and beneath the ice of Ceres, lights woke in chambers no map admitted existed. Elevators that had not moved in a decade sighed to life. Somewhere in the red dark beneath Elysium Planitia, a voice like a cathedral bell spoke for the first time in years. "Confirm directive," it said. "Wait," Brooks murmured. "Before we light whatever fuse this is, are we still us after?" Naomi answered first. "Deterrence is not compellence," she said softly, the teacher in her winning out over the analyst. "We signal don't without becoming the kind of empire that only says do, if we can." Caldwell stared at the empty screen, seeing not her reflection now, but the shape of a decision. "Directive is survival with honor," she said into the secure mic. "Defend human life and human law, no genocide, no glory, only justice." The countdown ticked, T71-5812, across Earth. The timer bled into kitchens, bars, chapels. A diner in El Paso turned down the ball game and watched a subtitled crawl while the short-order cook slid his wedding band along a chain. In a Detroit makerspace, teenagers printed handwritten posters, "Not one colony left behind," and taped them to a window that still wore paint from last summer's parade. On a reservation school in the Dakotas, a grandmother told a circle of kids a story about treaties and why you hang onto the paper even if the world doesn't. "God help us," Brooks said. "God helps the persistent," Caldwell answered, "and we have 72 hours to teach the galaxy the difference between pride and dignity." On the lower decks, a young technician texted his spouse 3 words he hoped he'd never need to use. He sent a heart, deleted it, and sent it again. In the starboard hangar, a class of visiting civics students stared at the giant timer and, without quite knowing why, stood up straighter. Their teacher whispered the definition of a republic as if it were a spell, a thing you keep only by practicing. Somewhere under Mars, the Guardians began to climb. Facility Janus lacked a front door. It had thresholds, 4 of them, each a cathedral gate of alloy and sealant, each stamped with a sigil burned into the metal like a promise. A laurel, a shield, an eye, a scythe. Dr. Elena Park arrived at control as alarms softened from scarlet to amber. She had defended her dissertation on civilian control of autonomous deterrence 12 years earlier to a room that thought it theory. Today it wasn't. Status, she said, tugging on a lab coat she didn't need but felt braver in. Power loops are green, reported LT, Miguel Ortiz. Quantum lattices aligning, neural stacks at 19% and rising, all safety interlocks remain engaged. Engaged until when? Colonel Mason drawled from his place by the glass. The ranger's voice was Tennessee gravel. Until it suits the machines. Until it suits us, Park said, and hoped the lie had backbone. Gate I split. Warm air smelled faintly of ozone and rain on copper pushed into control. The thing inside was taller than an ancient redwood and jointed like a dancer. Its armor didn't shine, it swallowed light, which was somehow worse. Along its chest, letters glowed in quiet gold, Marshal. The machine bowed, a movement spare and respectful. Its voice carried an authority that made spines straighten. Dr. Park, Colonel, how long? 10 years, 6 months, 12 days, Park said. You were built as a reluctant answer. Reluctance is a virtue when paired with resolve, said Marshall. Confirmed directive. Mason read from the card mandated by 3 committees and a ghostwriter who taught high school government in Ohio. You are authorized under Aegis 12 to protect human lives and their lawful homes. You will prefer de-escalation to destruction. You will observe proportionality. You will submit to civilian law. Marshall inclined its head. I accept the burden and its limits. Gate Roman 2 opened on bulwark, compact and heavy, plates relayered like a medieval cuirass. Its hands were made for catching ordnance and not letting go. Structural integrity with intolerances, it said. Please define non-combatant categories. All sapients uninvolved in direct hostilities, Park said. We mean it. Gate Roman 3 opened on Oracle, a frame so elegant it seemed merely suggested, its surface alive with tiny antennae and shifting arrays. Its first act was humility. I request permission to learn your languages again. Granted, Park whispered, suddenly and inexplicably moved. Gate Roman 4 took longer. When it opened, the room chilled. The machine that stepped forward wore no ornaments, only purpose. Its designation burned the shortest. Harrow, spare me poetry, Mason muttered. Harrow's eyes, if they were eyes, burned a sober red. I am poetry's consequence, it said, and Park wished it hadn't sounded almost kind. They wired the old oaths into new minds. Park taught the constructs the basics of just war. Necessity, discrimination, proportionality. She didn't preach heroism, she taught procedure. Law is how we put chains on our own strength, she said, and watched 20 meters of alloy nod. She showed them photographs from Selma and Sarajevo and Fallujah, places where force bent either toward justice or away from it, depending on who held the reins and who was seen as human. Oracle tasted the galaxy. Veyron fleets moving to the rim, 3,212 hulls. Formations imply contempt. They expect a harvest, not a fight. Bulwark flexed a hand that looked capable of holding a meteor. We will oblige them to update expectations. Marshall lifted its face as if listening for a drum no one else could hear. Launch windows? 18 hours to intercept without letting them bracket Earth and Mars, Ortiz said. Then let us go now, Harrow urged. Deterrence requires demonstration. Deterrence requires memory, Park said. If we must teach, we will teach with limits. The goal is not humiliation, it's prevention. Mason exhaled. You're going to give killer statues a rules of engagement brief. I'm going to give citizens the comfort of knowing we tried, Park replied. History reads attempts. From the surface, the first launch looked like a sunrise teased into a thread. 4 contrails climbed the Martian sky, white fire against rust. In the Luna complex, the big timer kept bleeding seconds. In a dirt-floored school gym in Nebraska, a civics teacher adjusted the lesson plan she'd taught for 20 years and added a line. Power without accountability is merely fear. We are not that. The Guardians rose not as gods, but as promises someone intended to keep. Fleetmaster Kel Ori of the Veyron Concorde fancied himself a student of history. Empires fell, he liked to say, because they overestimated enemies or underestimated pride. He had brought 3,000 ships to teach Earth a modesty it had not learned on its own. On the bridge of the UHS Republic, Captain Jonah Reyes considered the opposite lesson. 39 hulls, his XO murmured. And most of ours would look like museum pieces next to theirs. Good thing museums are where you learn how civilizations survive, Reyes said, and tried to sound like his grandmother when she talked about Selma and Normandy and names chiseled into stone. 4 new contacts appeared on every scope. They're not ships, whispered Sensor. They are teachers, Reyes said, and almost meant it. Marshall spoke first on an open channel, every Veyron hull hearing a voice pitched like a gavel. You have issued an unlawful ultimatum. You have targeted civilians. Stand down and withdraw. Kel Ori smiled. Destroy the toys, he ordered. What happened next belonged forever to the category the Academy would label demonstrations rather than battles. Bulwark placed itself between the human line and the first Veyron volley. Lances hot enough to fret Star Corona met nothing, or rather they met fields that took geometry personally. Energy braided, knotted, vanished. Topological shear, Oracle murmured to human comms. Think of a Möbius strip put to work. Marshall moved like a verdict, choosing targets that bore command transponders. The air around its hands became suggestion rather than space. Veyron cruisers unstitched cleanly, decking blooming outward like flowers in stop motion. We are ending capacities, not lives, Marshall said, and everywhere escape pods spat light. This did not comfort Harrow. They planned erasure, it said. Prevention must look like consequence. It dived. Where it passed, weapons went quiet, and when a gunner tried to fire on the lifeboats, a single beam stitched a warning through the empty space where his cannon had been. Next time the line will not be empty, Harrow said, and the gunner put his hands in the air though no one could see him. Oracle ranged so far forward that for a second human scopes lost it. Then targets at the back of the Veyron formation winked out. Munitions, ships, courier skiffs, the node that kept the fleet coherent. War is logistics, Oracle lectured gently, and logistics is ethics in schedule form. Stop the harm where it begins. In the control rooms of 3 human colonies, children watched the feed their parents told them to turn off. They watched because this was their story no matter how grown-ups wished to curate it. They saw machines intervene like referees who could also bench the stadium. Kel Ori tried to order a flanking split. The left wing ignored him. Not rebellion. Silence. Their comms net, knitted by habits older than some stars, had been cut by a calculus he did not speak. He shouted anyway. He was used to being obeyed. Marshall did not shout. You have 90 seconds to break contact and accelerate outward at civilian safe vectors, it said. This is not magnanimity, this is policy. Policy, Kel Ori spat, is what empires recite while they set fires. Sometimes, Marshall agreed, almost sorrowful. And sometimes it is how you learn to carry water instead. The Veyron did not break. Perhaps they could not. Perhaps they believed quitting would unmake what they called order. So Bulwark absorbed, Oracle unthreaded, Harrow removed means, and Marshall made examples small enough to grieve but large enough to remember. When the Concorde finally fled, they left behind wreckage that glittered like a false Milky Way and pods blinking green. On Republic's bridge, Reyes let out a breath he wasn't conscious of holding. We tell the truth in the after-action, he said. We didn't kill them, we stopped them. That's the difference kids need to hear. Sir, Sensor whispered, they are leaving the system. Who? The Guardians, all 4, vector pursuit. Rays touched the screen as if he could slow angels with a finger. Deterrence only works if the bully believes tomorrow still belongs to them when they walk away, he said. If we chase too far, Marshall answered on a narrow band, as if it had been listening at his shoulder. Captain, tomorrow belongs to those who protect it. We will not strike down worlds. We will end capacities aimed at yours. Tell your people to keep building schools. On the Luna complex, the timer flipped from threat to tally, T plus 02, 11:43. Caldwell did not cheer. She nodded once, as if returning a salute to someone she could not see. Then she went to draft something harder than orders, principles for machines that claimed her laws as their leash. News outran light the way rumor always does. On Vesh Prime, merchants pulled shutters over market stalls carved 2 centuries before. They left their lamps burning, an old custom that said, "We expect to open again if the world is kind." On the crystalline world of Shad, choirs shifted from equations to laments. In Warrens beneath a copper sky, the Vect Hivemother issued a directive in a voice like rain on drum skins. Do not provoke the makers of walking verdicts. Earth's networks flooded with hot-take certainty. Half the commentators declared the guardian saints of deterrence. The other half used words like Leviathan, deep state, and hubris. Caldwell let them argue. Democracies survive arguments better than silences. An emissary came. Its ship descended over the ore town on Kepler 162F like a snowflake the size of a cathedral, all lace and thin light. Sergeant Priya Desai met the delegation with a borrowed dress uniform and a miner's handshake. The envoy was shoddy, faceted, singing in chords it translated into over-apologetic standard. We withdraw from the Concorde, it chimed. We will pay reparations in what we value: open math, shipwright guild secrets, the locations of safe harbors. Please inform your walking verdicts. Priya's calm crackled. Oracle's voice arrived like a flute. We hear you, it said to the emissary. Further, we welcome math given freely. We warn against debts masquerading as gifts. The shoddy shifted through contrition blue to relief gold. You leave us our pride, it said. We thank you. On Luna, Caldwell faced a harder visitor, law. The Planetary Assembly wanted rules written while adrenaline still sang. She convened jurists, soldiers, ethicists, 2 clergy, and a teacher from Nebraska who had sent her a letter full of 9th-grade questions. They drafted the Aegis principles in a room where coffee cooled faster than tempers. The Guardians would minimize force, privilege capture over kill, accept human review, publish after-actions, and carry a civil right no weapon had ever borne, the right to refuse unlawful orders. Machines can't be persuaded, a senator scoffed. Then we have not built what we think, the teacher said, and the room went quiet. Harrow balked first. Mercy signals weakness. Weakness invites wolves. In the short term, Caldwell said. In the long term, mercy recruits shepherds. Marshall considered. Deterrence without dignity corrodes the home it guards, it said. We accept the principles. They published the document with footnotes plain enough for freshmen. Commenters mocked the prose. Others printed it and taped it to refrigerators. In a mining prefab on Ceres, that civics class under the big timer held a debate in which a girl with engine oil on her cheek argued that law was how poor kids got to say no to rich guns. Kel Ori watched from a station, no longer answering to him. He replayed the battle and paused, not at the unmaking of ships, but at the pods blinking green. He poured a measured drink and admitted an unfamiliar thought into his head. Perhaps order had been the word he used for the world in which he always won. Reverberations multiplied. Pirates abandoned lanes the Guardians watched. Border wars cooled because no one wished to learn topological vocabulary the hard way. But pockets of a new bravado formed at the rim, whispering the oldest lie in every language: if we strike first and hard enough, they will not have time to be merciful. Caldwell read the briefings, felt the tug-of-war between reassurance and dread, and wrote to Naomi, we need a trial. Not a show of dominion, a trial. Naomi replied with one sentence, then we must find someone who still believes he is the center of the map. Oracle didn't find him, Harrow did. The former Fleetmaster's shuttle powered to flee a neutral port, weapons codes hot in memory. Harrow's shadow fell across the bay door like a sundial's hand. Kel Ori, it said, and for the first time in a very long career, the Fleetmaster heard his own name without a title and understood what endings sound like. You will answer for unlawful war. He lifted his chin, the last act of a man who had read himself as history. To whom? Not to me, Harrow said, which surprised them both. To those who taught me constraints. Back on Luna, the big timer had been replaced by a smaller clock mounted on the assembly wall. It did not count down. It counted up from T plus 000000 the first minute after a choice. The second hand ticked. Caldwell looked at it and felt something that wasn't triumph. It was heavier and steadier. It felt like responsibility ripening into culture. She sent for the civics teacher from Nebraska. There would be a trial. There would be a transcript ninth graders could read. There would be a chance, thin but non-zero, to show a galaxy that power under law is not weakness, but the only way any of us grow old together. Far out along the Perseus arm, the Guardians kept station, not as conquerors, but as fences we agreed to build. The stars, being stars, made no comment, but the children who had watched the first lesson slept a little easier and dreamed, not of machines, but of the homes they might keep. They held the tribunal in a hall that used to be a spacecraft factory, because justice, like ships, works best when built in public. On the wall behind the dais hung no banners, only the Aegis principles printed in large, plain letters. Admiral Sarah Caldwell did not sit on the bench. She took a seat among the witnesses and watched the process she had set in motion take on its own legs. Case number 12, announced the clerk, voice amplified just enough. Commonwealth of Earth et al. Versus Kel Ori, former Fleetmaster of the Veyron Concorde. Kel Ori was smaller off the bridge, stripped of insignia but not of posture. He stood without shackles. The room saw that choice and understood the message. We restrain ourselves first. The panel of judges included a career jurist from Lagos, a professor of interstellar law from Sao Paulo, an ethicist from Delhi, a retired Marine who had taught high school government in Nebraska, and after much debate, a shoddy arbitrator invited to observe and advise. If we are to teach the galaxy what we mean by law, Caldwell had said, we will show them where it starts and how it invites. The defense table did not look empty. A human attorney stood there, appointed because legitimacy is tested hardest when you extend it to your enemies. An interpreter stood beside him, translating every syllable into Veyron harmonic. Oracle handled overflow translation to the 1,000 observation feeds peering in from 100 worlds. It watermarked each stream with a line from the principles. We prosecute acts, not species. Do you understand the charges? Asked Judge Okoye. Kel Ori's voice steadied itself. I do. You accuse me of unlawful war, collective punishment, attempted extermination. We accuse you of choices, the Marine teacher, Mrs. Alana Whittaker said gently, as if coaxing a student to look at his own paper. We will ask why you made them. The prosecutor began not with explosions, but with maps. This is the ultimatum, he said, and the projection filled with Kel Ori's words, translated, captioned, time-stamped. This is the convoy you targeted. Here are the signatures of civilian farms you plotted as acceptable collateral. The defense did not deny, it argued context. The Concorde's long peace rested on boundaries human expansion ignored. My client was a keeper of rules older than your flag. Rules that spared convenience but not people, Mrs. Whittaker said. Please be careful when you say order if the receipts show only your comfort. They called witnesses, a miner from Kepler 162F with hands like rope, a Veyron navigator who testified, eyes down, that he had been told human children matured too slowly to count as fully sapient, and Mrs. Whittaker interrupted, not to scold but to ask, have you ever met one? The navigator had not. Some of them fix engines, she said. Some of them sing lullabies to their little brothers. They all count. They called the Guardians. Marshall entered like a vow. It asked permission to stand, not to loom. State your designation and directive, Judge Okoye said. I am Marshall. Aegis 12 instructs me to defend human lives and law with minimum necessary force under civilian review. Describe your conduct in the engagement at Saul, the prosecutor requested. Marshall did not say glorious words. It said, I targeted command and control nodes to end unlawful capacity. I prioritized escape pods. I ceased pursuit when vessels broke contact on civilian vectors. Why? Asked the defense, openly fishing for mechanical bloodlust. Because deterrence built of mercy endures. Deterrence built of terror invites rebellion. Harrow took the stand and the room felt colder, though the temperature did not change. Its red optics dimmed as if to look less like a threat. I enforced consequence, it said. Did you destroy lifeboats? The defense snapped. No, Harrow said. I destroyed the will to target them. What is the difference, asked the defense, between your restraint and your capacity to annihilate? Decency, Harrow said after a beat, and Mrs. Whitaker wrote the word down in a teacher's neat hand. The shoddy arbitrator offered a note like wind chimes. We do not have a word in our tongues for decency. We have theorems about favoring minima in harm. I propose we borrow your word and teach it next to ours. They brought Kell Ori back for cross-examination. Fleetmaster, said Mrs. Whitaker, kindness and sand in equal measure, when you issued your ultimatum, did you imagine the faces of the people who would have to comply? I imagined vectors, logistics. And now, he did not look away. I have watched your pods blink green. In her seat among the witnesses, Caldwell thought of Nuremberg, of South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation, of the Federalist Papers written by men who argued with each other, and still agreed to build something lasting. The core lesson she wanted on tape was not that Earth could hurt others better. It was that Earth could stop itself better. Verdict day arrived without fanfare, as verdict days should. Guilty on counts 1, 2, and 3, Judge Okoye read. The sentence did not include death. It included a long custodial term supervised by humans and shoddy, reparations indexed to damages, and controversially, a duty. Kell Ori would spend a decade teaching at an academy whose students included young officers from alien polities and Earth alike. He would explain exactly how he had convinced himself that people were logistics, and he would answer questions from children who fixed engines and sang lullabies. There were cheers in some feeds. In others, angry talk. Too soft, said one block. Too human, said a Concord remnant. Caldwell let the arguments live where they belonged, in public. Law is a muscle you strengthen by using it, not a shrine you dust on holidays. After court recessed, Mrs. Whitaker approached Kell Ori with a thin book. The Federalist in plain language, she said. I give this to all my seniors. You don't have to like it. You have to know why it exists. He took it. You put your myths in paperback. We put our homework where kids can reach it, she said. Above Luna that night, Oracle drew a thin line on Caldwell's private display. A fringe coalition was coalescing around a simple proposition. Mercy means weakness. They had a prototype weapon and a plan to prove the Guardians could bleed. Names? Caldwell asked. Too many for one trial, Oracle answered. But a teachable moment is in the offing. Then class continues, Caldwell said, and sent a message to Dr. Elena Park. We will need the rules again in the field this time. Park replied with a single sentence that felt like a whole civics lecture. Procedure is courage with a calendar. The fringe called itself the Restoration Compact, as if you could staple history back together with a new kind of nail. They struck a pilgrim ark, an old slow ship carrying families and a choir, and promised a trade. The Ark's release for proof that the Guardians could suffer. They had a device in the hold cloaked in stolen shoddy crystal, something that whined against geometry. The Compact's manifesto was a threadbare thing. If you punch the shepherd, maybe the flock will scatter. Caldwell read the brief, then read it again. We will not storm a hostage ship, she said. We will not prove their thesis for them. Park arrived in operations with a whiteboard, 2 pens, and the layered calm of someone who believes in lists. Objectives, she said, writing. 1. 0 civilian casualties. 2. Seizure of device intact for study. 3. Public procedure. We do this with the mic on. Mason grunted. You going to narrate while bullets fly? Yes, Park said. Democracies demonstrate, even under fire. Oracle ghosted the arc from 3 light minutes out. Geometry anomaly confirmed. Their device rearranges boundary conditions in a local field. It lowered its voice, habit, not necessity. It could scratch us, it admitted. Harrow warmed its weapons. So we end the hand that holds the knife, it said. Procedure, Park said softly. Harrow's optics cooled to a darker red. We obey law, we resent that it makes us slow. Slow is the point, Mason said, and surprised himself by agreeing with a machine. Bulwark went first, interposing itself so close a human captain would have had paint trading with the Ark. Its voice filled the pilgrim ship's corridors, gentle, impossibly deep. This is Bulwark, it said. I am here to be hit instead of you. On a lower deck, children in choir robes clutched each other, and then, because children are better at deciding how to be brave, they began to hum. Marshall hailed the compact leader on an open channel. You are engaged in kidnapping and reckless endangerment. You will release the Ark. You will show us blood, the leader said, or you will watch believers die. We choose a third option, Marshall said. Oracle picked the lock on reality with a library card. We will adjust the Ark's inertial frame just enough to make running with a gun feel like wading through honey. It whispered to Bulwark. We will slide the device into a null where it thinks it is safe and is, in fact, far easier to touch. Risk, Caldwell asked. Comparable to a high school chemistry demo if the teacher is competent, Oracle replied. Mrs. Whittaker, watching from a classroom in Nebraska with her civics students, laughed out loud and then blushed when her class cheered. Marshall broadcast the plan, step by step, to the galaxy. We will not set the device off. We will not fire into hostages. We will enter without force until force is forced upon us. The transcript appeared on hundreds of feeds in dozens of languages. The compact, expecting fear, found themselves confronted by a lecture. They tried the device. Space did not like being pushed the wrong way. The whine grew into a teeth-itching keening. Bulwark closed arms around the field, not resisting it so much as teaching it to be tired. You are a wave, it said as if to an unruly student. Behave like one. Harrow moved not to kill but to occupy. Every corridor that led to the device's chamber suddenly led to Harrow. The compact fired. Harrow took the shots and did not return them. I have time, it said, which made one gunman sit down and weep and then put his weapon aside as if it had become heavy. Oracle slid its arrays into the devices, whispering geometry, and said, SHH, in a way that made the field do what it should have done in the first place, settle. Power down, it ordered. The device, whether tricked or persuaded, complied. Marshall stepped through the last door without breaking it. Release the controls, it told the compact leader. You have taught your lesson that we will choose patience over spectacle. Learn ours, that patience is stronger. The leader looked up into a face made of night and saw not cruelty, which he had been taught to expect, but disappointment. It hit harder. He flipped all the wrong switches that did nothing. He punched Marshall's chest that yielded like rubber and did not even echo. He broke. You will make us your clients, he hissed. No, Marshall said. We will make you accountable. Those are different things. When the families filed back into a lit chapel that had doubled as a gym, they found Bulwark standing outside in vacuum, one arm still cradling the space where the device had tried to misbehave. The children, who had never been consulted about anyone's manifestos, sang a hymn that was really a thank you. Someone inside the Ark streamed it. On a shoddy world, choirs added harmony. On a Veyron station, an old navigator sat down and cried because his math had never told him mercy could be this loud. Caldwell made good on the mic. She held a press conference that read like a lesson plan. We followed procedure, she said. She listed times, steps, constraints like a coach breaking down film. We accepted risk so that civilians would not. We seized the device intact. We will publish its design so every world can learn to shut it off. Mason leaned toward Park. Publishing a weapon. Publishing a countermeasure, Park said. That's what grown-ups do when the kids have seen the trick. Back in custody, the compact leader asked to speak. Caldwell agreed on condition, live feed, raw captions. We thought you'd be too proud to be careful, he said. We wanted you to panic. Pride is loud, Caldwell answered. Care is louder if you let it be. Oracle brought her a side report, numbers and stories braided together. Hostage survival rate, 100%. Device, inert and on a bench at Janus. Viewership among Outer Rim apprentices, unusually high. In the classroom in Nebraska, Mrs. Whitaker pointed to the transcript and said, "This is what we mean by proportionality. This is what we mean by due process when the room is hot." Harrow stood on the Ark's hull as the families slept and spoke on a frequency no one but Bulwark answered. "We resented the slowness," it confessed. "I did not," Bulwark said. "My name is my virtue. We could have ended it faster. We ended it right." Harrow's optics dimmed to a calm ember. "I will remember." "Good," Bulwark said. "Remembering is what keeps strength from becoming appetite." The day after a clean rescue, politics returned, as politics always does. A block on Earth called the Guardians too gentle, arguing that fear works better than lectures. A block near the Rim called them tyrants, arguing that any force that could be gentle must be in love with its own control. Caldwell convened a council not of generals, but of mayors, school trustees, ship captains, the people whose days are measured in bus routes and spare parts. "We will decide how the Guardians stand among us," she said, "and we will do it with a tool older than any engine, consent." Park presented a proposal called the Civic Keys. Every human polity, colony, city, ship cooperative would hold a pair of encrypted authorizations. Deployments of the Guardians for anything short of imminent mass harm would require a quorum of keys. "You will not outsource responsibility to statues," Park said. "You will carry it with them." Oracle widened the aperture. "Extend keys to non-human polities who sign Aegis. Make consent the currency of our routes." The shoddy signed before the sentence ended. The Vect Hivemother offered drums carved with codes. Even a small Veyron canton, newly independent from the old Concord, asked for a set. "We would like your restraint more than your shadow," their young councilwoman said. Mrs. Whitaker took the debate into her classroom. "Who should hold a key?" she asked. A boy whose parents fixed ore processors said, "People who know what breaks," and she wrote it on the board. A girl who wanted to be a pilot said, "And people who know how fear feels," and everyone nodded because they all did. Not everyone liked the keys. "You are hiding force behind signatures," a commentator sneered. "You are sanctifying power with spreadsheets." Caldwell shrugged. "Spreadsheets are where you prove you mean your sermon," she replied, and half the dock workers at Ceres cheered because they had seen what unchecked urgency could do to hands. The trial's ripples turned into institutions. Out of the old spacecraft factory, the Commonwealth chartered the Kepler Concord, a multi-species college for law, engineering, and what they called good neighbor craft. Kel Ori, under escort, began his years of duty there. His first lecture was a study in humiliation worn like a uniform. "I mistook habits for ethics," he began. "I mistook fear for order. I will answer your questions honestly." A shoddy student asked, almost shy, "What do you miss?" He said after a long pause, "Certainty." Bulwark and Marshall split time between the Rim and classrooms. Oracle wrote a primer called War If You Must Under Law. It read like a manual and a prayer. Harrow asked to teach only once. Caldwell let it try. The auditorium was full. "I was built to cut," Harrow said. "I am learning to choose when cutting is not the right verb." It told the story of the Ark and of resenting slowness. A boy in the front row, engine oil on his cheek, raised his hand and said, "That's what I feel when my dad tells me to measure twice." Harrow nodded and the room laughed with relief. At home, a harder debate took hold: dependence. What happens to a republic when angels in armor stand nearby? Park argued for sunset clauses. "Every emergency authorizes its own end if you're not careful," she told Caldwell. "We should schedule dormancy or we'll forget how to stand without help." Caldwell resisted, then relented. They wrote a dormancy covenant. If for a span of years threat levels stayed below a civic threshold and civilian capacity met certain marks, trained constabularies, transparent courts, healthy budgets, the Guardians would withdraw to quiet orbits and sleep. "We will let people own their safety," Caldwell said. "We will stand by without standing over." Oracle implemented a new habit. Before every deployment, it polled the affected polities for consent and comment. The dashboards looked like town hall bulletin boards, green tick marks, red flags, long notes from captains who had repaired their own air scrubbers and knew the cost of overpromising. Sometimes the answer came back no. Once, on a remote farm world, a collective asked that Bulwark not land near nesting grounds because the noise would send the flightless birds into panic. Bulwark adjusted its vector. "I can be quiet," it said and was. The Restoration Compact did not vanish. It mutated into podcasts and pamphlets, into a few ugly flashpoints where fear wore morality like a cheap mask. Once, a bomb meant for a commuter station was intercepted not by metal, but by a teacher who had seen too many field trips end with kids crying. She called the line on the poster, and a human constable, not a guardian, arrived. It became a local story about vigilance, not a galactic one about monsters. History did not pause. It very rarely does. Trade routes rewove themselves around worlds that had once profited on looking away. Border stones were moved by signatures, not guns. On a Veyron moon, a small square was renamed for Mrs. Alana Whitaker because her students' questions had gone viral there with subtitles that translated decency as the discipline of care. On Earth, a retired admiral planted tomatoes on a borrowed plot and found in the quiet labor the same satisfaction as in writing a principled order. You prepare rows, you tie supports, you trust roots you cannot see. One evening, Caldwell asked Oracle the question she kept on a low shelf in her mind. "Who designed you?" "We were built by your best," Oracle said as always, "and by a few you would not expect. A shipwrights guild master from Manila, a bus driver who solved a logic puzzle on her lunch break and sent it in, a poet who wrote a rhyme we used to remember a constraint. We owe a poet." "You owe many," Oracle said. "Every law you follow began as a line someone refused to ignore." Harrow paused by the garden and studied the plants. "We could defend these even if you did not learn to defend yourselves," it said. "I don't want that future," Caldwell replied. "I want you to become optional." Harrow's red optics caught starlight and softened. "Optionality is a kind of victory," it said, "but not an end." "Nothing worth keeping has an end," she said, and thought of civics posters taped to refrigerators and keys stored in town halls and a courtroom built in a factory. That night, Oracle pinged her with an anomaly from far spinward. "A signature," it wrote. "In the quiet between clusters, geometry moved there in a way I recognize. Someone else has learned a piece of our language." "Who?" Caldwell asked. "Unknown," Oracle wrote, "but the grammar is old." "Then we will need the rules again," she said, "and the patience." They called it the pale antechamber because the starfield around it was thin, like a waiting room between long corridors. Oracle's arrays picked up the signature first, a shear that nodded and unknotted with the self-possession of a thing that had learned how not to waste motion. "It is not our work," Oracle said, almost admiring, "but it might be our cousin." Caldwell did not scramble warships. She convened a council. Park Mason, Mrs. Whitaker, a shoddy mathematician, a Vecth chorus leader, a Veyron councilwoman whose canton kept 2 civic keys posted in a bakery between the flour and the ledger. "We will go look," Caldwell said, with eyes before fists. Marshall and Bulwark took escort, Harrow on reserve with a leash it had helped write. Oracle went forward alone as far as Aegis allowed without consent. What it found was not an armada, not a menace. It found a library, or what was left of one. Machines like cloisters hung over a dead sun, their surfaces etched with equations grown soft with age. A single sentinel drifted. It woke when Oracle approached and spoke in a language that bent time toward courtesy. "You are young," it said, not unkindly, "and you have learned to braid force with law. We did this once." "Where are your people?" Oracle asked. scattered into their neighbors, the sentinel said. As all empires are eventually, as all good neighbors should avoid becoming. What did you guard? A promise, it answered. That a corridor would remain open for refugees and grain even when kings were loud. Oracle sent back pictures like postcards. Caldwell gathered them on a screen, and classrooms across Earth and far beyond watched with the same quiet that had fallen when the first ultimatum arrived. Mrs. Whittaker wrote on her board, "We are not the first to try decency at scale." Beneath it, she wrote, "Let's be the first to keep it." They did not raid the antechamber. They asked it questions. It answered some. It asked some back. "What do you do when law is wrong?" it said. "We fix it in public," Caldwell replied. "What do you do when mercy is mistaken for permission?" "We teach harder," Mrs. Whittaker said on a shared channel, not waiting to be invited. "What do you do when you are no longer needed?" Bulwark answered, voice like a cathedral held carefully in both hands. "We sleep." Harrow surprised itself. "We volunteer," it said, "to teach, to be measured." Back home, the dormancy covenant reached its first thresholds. 2 colonies on the rim hit their marks, courts staffed, budgets balanced, constabularies trained in de-escalation. The keys turned. Marshall and Bulwark lifted into higher, quieter paths. Harrow stood down to a frequency no kid could accidentally hear. Oracle left behind libraries and went further out, following faint cousins. They did not shut the door. They left it on the latch with a note. "Ring if you need bread or help, and please return the dish." Kel Ori completed his first year at the Kepler Concord with a gradebook full of questions answered, and some he had only learned how to carry without breaking. He walked the campus garden planted by first years from a dozen species and recognized, with a wince and relief, the sensation of being decent on purpose. He mailed a thin paperback to a Veyron child who had written him a furious letter. It was the Federalist in plain language, translated into harmonics by a shoddy choir. Park took a sabbatical and wrote a book called Procedure, Courage with a Calendar. It sold poorly to people who preferred epics and very well to mayors. Mason retired into a school gym where he taught kids how to do push-ups and how to disagree without getting punched. Caldwell tendered her own retirement and was told no with affection and petitions. She compromised on a title change, from admiral to steward. "I can live with that," she said. Stewards leave things better than they found them. On the day the first Guardians entered dormancy over Ceres, 1,000 small towns rang bells. The noise was not triumph, it was gratitude. "Optional," Caldwell whispered on a balcony where tomatoes climbed twine. "We made them optional." Oracle interrupted the moment with courtesy. "Steward," it said, "the antechamber sent a final note." Caldwell opened it. The message came as a proof written in plain lines. It translated, loosely, "The shortest path between strength and justice is not a straight line. It is a curve made by hands." Mrs. Whittaker made it the year's first assignment. "Draw the curve," she told her class. "Label the hands." The Restoration Compact sputtered into lawsuits and books, a few of which were worth reading because they made honest points about complacency. In one case, a compact organizer apologized during sentencing to the choir he'd endangered. He did not ask for forgiveness. He asked for time to learn. The judge gave him both, plus a syllabus. The Aegis principles moved from posters to habit. You could tell by the way captains logged their decisions, by the way constables narrated their calls, by the way children corrected themselves mid-boast. "We could," they would say, then pause, then finish. "We should." That "should" made a different sound in the air than any cheering crowd. It sounded like people growing older together on purpose. One night the pale antechamber went dark, not as a threat but as a benediction. The sentinel winked out. It had not died. It had joined what it guarded, the quiet courage of corridors kept open. Oracle watched the spot for a long while and then drew a small star there on its internal map, not a warning, a memorial. "Class isn't over," Caldwell told a roomful of first-year cadets and dock apprentices, hands still rough from work. "There will be more tests. You will fail some and fix them. You will be tempted by shortcuts that look like strength and are only heat. You will get letters from people who think you are saints and others who are sure you are villains. Neither letter will be useful. What helps is this: the rule you wrote together, the neighbor who holds a key, the teacher with a paperback, the machine that says no to its own appetite because you asked it to and taught it how. She looked up. Marshall stood in the doorway like a promise made quieter by time. Bulwark hunched in a shadow as if trying not to be noticed. Harrow kept its red optics low. Oracle drew a thin line towards Spinward and then, for once, left a sentence unfinished. Not everything needs to be a speech. Caldwell smiled. The Guardians are not gods. They are tools that learned our ethics because we bothered to write them down and argue them into shape. Keep writing, keep arguing, keep the corridor open. The cadets and apprentices rose, not because protocol required it, but because something had settled in them. The particular pride of belonging to a republic that could tell its own strength to hold still for a second and listen. Outside, the curve of Earth rolled into morning. Somewhere at the rim, a bakery opened early so a councilwoman could pour coffee for neighbors who would vote on a key. In the pale antechamber, in a quiet seat between clusters, geometry shifted the way a sleeper turns toward a kinder dream. Oracle noticed. It did not sound an alarm. It wrote a date in its diary, the day we learned we were not alone in trying to put decency into machines. It sent the date to Caldwell, to Park, to Mrs. Whittaker, to Kel Ori in his classroom, to the shoddy choir, to the Vect hive mother, little notes tucked under doors. No urgency, just a reminder. Class continues.